Hey everybody. So I'm doing something a little bit different today, and that is filming in my car. And one of the reasons why is I am at my daughter's dance studio and I don't have a ton of time to go back home and get some things done. So I thought I would just have a conversation for today's video. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is daylight savings time. As everybody knows, in most of the country, daylight savings time happened this past weekend, and we did the whole fallback, gain an hour thing. And I am watching people just blow a fuse or gasket or whatever you want to say on social media because they hate it, and seasonal depression is setting in, and yada, 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 yada. First of all, seasonal depression does not have anything to do with the time going back. You still have the same amount of sunlight hours in a day when you switch your clock back. You don't actually lose an hour of sunlight. It just shifts to the morning time. So I always have to laugh at people when they blame daylight savings time on, or blame daylight savings for seasonal depression. I am probably one of the few people who actually likes daylight savings time. And that is because I am a gardener and I also have children. And so in the winter, when you're getting up and it's dark because the days are getting shorter and colder, and you're getting up and heading to school and it's still kind of dark, it's hard to get going and it's hard to get kids going. Now, I don't particularly care for, coming home in the evenings and they don't have as much time to spend outside. However, I get it. Like, I want to be up during the daylight hours. And so since we're getting up at, 6 o'clock in the morning and it's starting to get light at 6 o'clock in the morning, I feel like the day is better utilized when we're doing that. And anyway, I found it interesting, reading what some of the people have been saying about how it messes them up. And, I can see that for, a few days, maybe even a week, it does mess with your system a little bit, but you adjust. I mean, my goats adjust, everybody adjusts. So I wanted to do a little research. And the funny thing is I actually went into it because back in school, we were always taught that they did it for farmers, especially during the war, because they had to go work in the factories and then they needed time when they got home to utilize the daylight hour to take care of animals and stuff and crops during the summer. And that's what we were told. And there is some truth to that, but it's mostly false. And the reason why I say that is because farmers and agricultural industry actually fought against, they lobbied against daylight savings time back in 1919. Because they didn't want to mess with the rhythms of the cows and, the delivery system and this, that, and the other. So there was a lot into it, but the agricultural industry actually lobbied against daylight savings time. However, it is true in that it was done during wartime, and it was popular in rural areas and suburban areas where people cultivated victory gardens. And they went and worked in the factories during the day or taught school or did all this stuff. And then they went home and did the gardening. So in a way, I can kind of see where they just kind of attached the agricultural end because it was done during wartime to conserve energy. But it was very popular with people who had to go to work, like the women and stuff who went to work in the factories and then needed that daylight time to cultivate their gardens and stuff. So I think that's where that partly true kind of comes in. But the agricultural industry, the big ag industry itself, lobbied against it. But I want to go back because a lot of people also contribute daylight savings time to Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin actually, when he was an ambassador to Paris, I believe, he wrote to one of the Parisian papers back in 1784. And from what I understand, it was more of a satire piece. But it was all about conserving, Paris could conserve candles and reduce their output and their cost and things like that if they would go with the flow of daylight and switch the shops and things like that with daylight hours. And so that's when he coined that phrase in that letter, early to bed, early to rise makes a man wealthy, healthy, and wise, or healthy, wealthy, and wise, whichever way it goes. But then there was a lot of satire around it, talking about taxing shutters and, this, that, and the other. So he did not specifically suggest daylight savings as we know it today. He simply proposed to go with the flow of the sun for business hours and stuff like that to conserve candles and energy and save money. But it wasn't long till a fellow by the name of George Hudson in 1895, and then again William Willett in 1907. One was from New Zealand, and I can't remember where the other one was from. But they also proposed something similar, and, more along the lines of daylight savings time, with 2-hour moves of clocks, in order to save energy and fuel costs and things like that. Because people would, work during light and go to bed during dark, so they wouldn't be using up these things. In 1908, Ontario, Canada actually implemented it, and then in 1916, the German Empire did it nationwide, and also, I believe it was Austria did it that year as well, and they did it to conserve energy, conserve coal. And then America followed suit in 1918 to conserve energy during wartime. So in the 1970s, Congress actually decided to run an experiment and passed a 2-year permanent daylight savings time so that we would stay in daylight savings time, which means spring forward, and we would stay in that for 2 years. And to reduce energy consumption and always have more sunlight in the evening. And people hated it so bad. It did not work because so many people complained about having to get up and go to work in the dark and go to school in the dark, and safety issues of kids going to school in the dark. And it was so unpopular that before the 2-year time limit was up, before the experiment was up, they actually repealed it in 1974. So, go forward a little bit more, and 2007 was when they set the precedence of, specific dates in March and November, I guess based on the moons and the time and everything. That's when they came up with the consistency of March and November for daylight savings time, instead of just random kind of times. So, we've been doing that ever since. Now, some states have given up on it. Many parts of the world have given up on it, and some parts of the world have never even done it, especially near the equator when the daylight times don't really vary as much through the year, or really far north in parts of Alaska and Canada where the daylight times can vary so greatly. I mean, they have days and months where there's no daylight at all. So, it's kind of pointless. But for a large majority of places in Europe and the United States and other places, they have either done it before or are still currently doing it. The U.S., I believe, is the largest portion where most of us are still doing it, though there are a few states who have switched, and I believe they've gone back to the standard time, which is what we are actually in right now. So we are in standard time right now. So if we never changed, then in the summertime, it would be getting daylight at, like 5 o'clock in the morning and getting dark at 8 o'clock in the evening. So, if people don't want to change the clocks, that would be the standard. And, holding to the daylight savings time, which is not the actual standard time, would create those issues of you're going to work and school and stuff in the dark. And it would actually, there are studies that show that biologically and with our brains, if we're going to stay to one time and not change the clocks and stuff, that the standard time would be healthier and more beneficial than staying at the daylight savings time. Now, in 2022, the Senate did pass a bill that said we would keep the daylight savings time, but I think it was keeping daylight savings time. And the House did not pass the bill that went along with it because they could not decide between keeping the standard time or daylight savings time as the permanent, and then it's been off the table to my knowledge, and the House has no plans at this time to pick it back up. And with everything going on, I think daylight savings time is probably the least of our worries. So I personally don't mind daylight savings time. I love having the extra time in the summer when I don't have to get up as early because the kids aren't in school, and we can enjoy the time in the pool and the garden and all that stuff later in the afternoon. I do like in the mornings in the winter getting up early, especially around, think about this, around Christmas time, you want to turn those Christmas lights on in the evening and enjoy, Christmas movies and all that stuff. And so with it getting darker early, I just turn my Christmas lights on. So the only time that I really, it kind of bothers me is like in January. And even then it doesn't really bother me because I'm planting my garden and spending warm days in the greenhouse and getting my vitamin D. So that is my little history lesson on daylight savings time and farmers and gardeners, and my opinion on everybody freaking out about daylight savings time. Like, it just, calm down, people. You'll be fine in a day or two. Come spring, you might be tired for a day or two, but you'll get through it. We'll all get through it. It's been going on for over 100 years now, so you should be used to it at this point. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying your brighter mornings and getting up with the chickens and seeing the sunrise like I am. I love getting my coffee in the mornings and taking the dog out while the kids start moving around and listening to my roosters crow. But anyway, I will see you later this week on the next video. Bye, guys.